The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Prince William walked quietly through the ancient corridors. His footsteps echoed softly against the stone walls, each step carrying the weight of recent conversations that had kept him awake through the night. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had found him in his study at dawn, still wearing yesterday's clothes, surrounded by letters and documents that told stories of struggles he could barely comprehend. "You haven't slept," she said softly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. The warmth of her touch seemed to ground him, pulling him back from the overwhelming thoughts that had consumed his mind for hours. William looked up at his wife, seeing the concern in her eyes that mirrored his own feelings. "I keep thinking about the letter from Manchester," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The one from Sarah Thompson." Catherine knew exactly which letter he meant. It had arrived 3 days ago, written in shaky handwriting on simple notebook paper. Sarah Thompson, a single mother of 2, had lost her job during the recent economic downturn. Her letter described sleepless nights, choosing between heating and food, watching her children's faces as she tried to explain why there wasn't enough for dinner. She hadn't asked for anything in her letter. She had simply wanted someone to know that people like her existed, that behind the statistics were real families facing impossible choices. "She's not the only one," Catherine replied, settling into the chair beside William's desk. "There are hundreds more just like hers." The pile of correspondence on William's desk had grown steadily over the past months. Letters from families across the United Kingdom, each telling a story of quiet desperation, of dignity maintained despite overwhelming circumstances. There were letters from elderly pensioners choosing between medication and meals, from young couples postponing dreams of starting families because they couldn't afford the basics, from children writing to ask if the royal family could help their parents find work. William picked up another letter, this one from Newcastle, written by a grandfather named Thomas Fletcher. His daughter had moved back home with her 3 children after losing her apartment. 7 people now lived in his small 2-bedroom house, and he described the sound of his youngest grandchild, only 4 years old, asking why everyone seemed so sad all the time. "We have to do something," William said, running his hands through his hair. "But what? How do you help people without making it seem like charity? How do you maintain their dignity while offering assistance?" Catherine understood his struggle. Their position came with tremendous privilege, but also with complex protocols and expectations. Every public gesture was scrutinized, every charitable effort analyzed for political implications. Yet these letters represented real people, real suffering that existed beyond the realm of politics or public relations. "Remember what your mother used to say about connecting with people," Catherine said gently. She always believed that the most powerful thing you could do was simply show up, be present, and let people know they weren't forgotten. William smiled slightly at the mention of his mother. Princess Diana had indeed possessed an extraordinary ability to connect with people from all walks of life. She had a way of making everyone feel seen and valued, regardless of their circumstances. Her legacy had shaped William's understanding of what it meant to serve, but translating that understanding into action in today's world felt increasingly challenging. "But this feels bigger than just showing up," William continued. "These families need practical help. They need jobs, affordable housing, access to healthcare. They need systemic change that's beyond what we can provide through traditional charitable work." Catherine nodded, understanding the frustration in her husband's voice. They had supported numerous charities, attended countless fundraising events, and raised awareness for various causes. While these efforts made a difference, the scale of need described in the letters seemed to require something more immediate, more personal. "What if we started smaller?" Catherine suggested. "What if we focused on just a few families first, really got to understand their situations, and then figured out how to help in ways that truly make a difference?" William considered this approach. It went against the usual royal protocol of maintaining distance, of helping through established institutions and formal channels. But the traditional methods felt inadequate when faced with the raw honesty of Sarah Thompson's letter or the quiet desperation evident in Thomas Fletcher's careful handwriting. "We'd have to be careful," Williams said. "It couldn't look like publicity or political positioning. It would have to be genuine, private, real." "The most meaningful gestures often are private," Catherine replied. "At least initially." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside the window, the castle grounds were coming alive with the activities of another day. Staff members moved purposefully across the courtyards, gardeners tended to the meticulously maintained flower beds, and Tourists were already beginning to gather near the gates. It was a world of order and tradition, beautiful in its own way, but feeling increasingly distant from the struggles described in the letters on William's desk. "I want to meet them," William said suddenly. "Sarah Thompson, Thomas Fletcher, the others. Not in an official capacity, not with photographers or press releases. Just as one person talking to another." Catherine felt a mix of admiration and concern. She knew her husband's heart, understood his genuine desire to help, but she also knew the complexities such meetings could create. How would that work? Security alone would make it complicated. "We'll figure it out," Williams said, his voice gaining strength as the idea took shape. "There has to be a way to do this right, to make real connections without turning it into a spectacle." As the morning progressed, William and Catherine began to formulate a plan. They would start with just a few families, those whose letters had particularly moved them. They would find ways to meet privately, to understand their situations fully before determining how best to help. It would require careful coordination with their security team and staff, but they were determined to make it work. The couple spent hours that day reading through more letters, each one adding to their understanding of the challenges facing ordinary families across the country. There were stories of children going to school hungry, of parents working multiple jobs but still unable to make ends meet, of elderly people isolated and struggling with the most basic needs. "This changes everything," Catherine said as they finished reading the last letter in the pile. "Once you really understand what people are going through, you can't just go back to business as usual." William agreed completely. The weight of responsibility he had always felt as a future king had suddenly become more personal, more urgent. These weren't abstract concepts or statistics. These were real people whose lives could be changed by thoughtful, well-directed assistance. As evening approached, William made a decision that would set in motion a series of events neither he nor Catherine could fully anticipate. He picked up his phone and called his private secretary, asking for a meeting the following morning to discuss a new initiative that would require unconventional approaches and absolute discretion. The first steps had been taken toward what would become one of the most significant periods in their royal service, though neither of them fully realized it yet. They simply knew that something had to be done, that the traditional boundaries between the royal family and the people they served needed to be reconsidered. That night, as they prepared for bed, Catherine noticed that William seemed more at peace than he had in days. The decision to act, even without knowing exactly what form that action would take, had lifted some of the burden he had been carrying. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as they turned off the lights. "I've never been more sure of anything," William replied. "We have the ability to help, really help. How could we not try?" The unmarked car pulled into the driveway of a modest terraced house in Manchester 3 weeks after William and Catherine had first read Sarah Thompson's letter. The neighborhood was quiet on this Tuesday afternoon, with children still at school and most adults at work. William adjusted his baseball cap and glanced at Catherine, who wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. To any observer, they might have been relatives visiting family. Their security detail had worked tirelessly to make this moment possible. The route had been carefully planned, alternative transportation arranged, and the entire visit coordinated to attract no attention. Even Sarah Thompson didn't know the full identity of the visitors who had reached out through intermediaries, requesting a private meeting to discuss her situation. Sarah opened the door tentatively, having expected representatives from a charitable organization. She had written to dozens of agencies and government departments over the past months, hoping someone might offer assistance or at least guidance. When she saw the two people standing on her doorstep, something in their bearing suggested this was different, though she couldn't quite place why. "Mrs. Thompson?" Catherine said gently. "We're here about your letter. May we come in?" Sarah's small living room told the story of a family making do with very little. The furniture was old but clean, children's drawings covered one wall, and a small stack of bills sat prominently on the coffee table. Despite the obvious financial struggles, the house felt like a home, filled with warmth and the evidence of a mother's love for her children. "Please sit down," Sarah said, quickly moving to clear space on the sofa. "I'm sorry about the mess. The children were here before school, and you know how it is." William and Catherine settled onto the worn sofa, immediately putting Sarah at ease with their relaxed demeanor. There were no formal introductions, no explanation of who they were or why they had come. Instead, Catherine simply said, "Tell us about your children." Sarah's face brightened immediately. "Emma is 8, and she's brilliant at math. Her teacher says she might be gifted." And Jack is 5. He starts proper school in September, but he's already reading better than some of Emma's classmates. As Sarah spoke about her children, her pride was evident despite their circumstances. She showed them Emma's school reports and Jack's drawings, each achievement celebrated as if it were the most important thing in the world. William found himself thinking about his own children, how different their experiences were, yet how fundamentally similar Sarah's love for her children was to his and Catherine's love for theirs. It must be difficult, managing everything on your own, Catherine said softly. Sarah's composure wavered slightly. I try not to let them see how worried I am. Children shouldn't have to think about whether there'll be food tomorrow or if we'll be able to stay in our home. That's supposed to be the parent's job, isn't it? The conversation continued for over an hour, with Sarah gradually opening up about the realities of her daily life. She described the constant calculations, whether to turn on the heating or save money for food, whether to buy school supplies or pay for gas to get to job interviews. She spoke about the shame of having to visit food banks, the exhaustion of working temporary jobs that barely covered basic expenses, and the loneliness of carrying these burdens without anyone to share them with. I wrote that letter because I felt invisible, Sarah explained. You read about families struggling, but it's always statistics, never real people with names and stories. I wanted someone to know that we exist, that we're trying our best, that we're not asking for handouts, but just for a chance to build something better. William leaned forward, his voice gentle but serious. What would make the biggest difference right now? If you could change one thing about your situation, what would it be? Sarah considered the question carefully. A stable job, she said without hesitation. Something with regular hours so I could arrange proper childcare, with enough pay to cover our basic needs. I'm good with numbers, I'm reliable, I work hard. I just need someone to give me a chance. Catherine exchanged a quick glance with William. They had spent weeks researching Sarah's background, understanding her qualifications, and work history. She had been laid off from her position as an administrative assistant when her company downsized, and despite her skills and experience, the job market had been unforgiving. Age discrimination, the gap in her employment history, and the challenges of single parenthood had created barriers that seemed insurmountable. What if that chance came along? William asked. What would you need to make it work? Childcare is the biggest issue, Sarah replied. Emma's at school during the day, but Jack isn't, and after-school programs are expensive. If I could find affordable, reliable care for them, I could take almost any full-time position. As they talked, William and Catherine began to understand that Sarah's situation wasn't unique. It represented a perfect storm of circumstances that trapped many families in cycles of poverty despite their best efforts to escape. The solutions weren't complicated in theory, but the practical barriers were enormous for someone without resources or connections. When it came time to leave, William and Catherine still hadn't revealed their identities. Instead, they simply thanked Sarah for her time and honesty, promising that someone would be in touch soon about potential opportunities. Why did you really come? Sarah asked as they reached the door. I mean, I appreciate it, but this isn't how these things usually work, is it? Catherine paused, choosing her words carefully. Because your letter mattered. Because you matter. And because sometimes the most important conversations happen when people just talk to each other as equals. The drive back to London was quiet, both William and Catherine processing what they had experienced. The statistics and reports they had read about poverty and unemployment had suddenly become real in a way that was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Sarah's dignity in the face of such challenges, her focus on her children's well-being despite her own struggles, and her realistic understanding of what she needed to succeed had left a profound impression. She's remarkable, Catherine said finally. The way she's managing everything, keeping hope alive for her children while dealing with so much uncertainty. And she's just one person, William replied. There are thousands of families in similar situations across the country, people with skills and determination who just need the right opportunity. That evening, they met with their private secretary and a small team of trusted advisors to discuss what they had learned. The conversation was unlike any they had ever had about royal duties or charitable work. Instead of talking about public appearances or fundraising events, they focused on practical solutions and direct intervention. We need to think about this differently, William explained to the group. Instead of supporting charities from a distance, what if we could create actual opportunities? What if we could connect people like Sarah with employers who need reliable workers? The team listened carefully as William and Catherine described their vision. It wasn't about traditional charity or one-time assistance. Instead, they wanted to create sustainable pathways for families to improve their circumstances through their own efforts, with targeted support to overcome specific barriers. It would require a completely new approach, one advisor noted. And it would need to be done carefully to avoid any appearance of favoritism or political interference. Then, we do it carefully, Catherine said firmly. We find ways to help that preserve dignity and create real change. Over the following days, William and Catherine worked with their team to develop a framework for what they were beginning to think of as quiet intervention. They would identify families through the letters they had received, meet with them privately to understand their specific needs, and then work behind the scenes to create opportunities or remove barriers. For Sarah Thompson, this meant connecting her with a medium-sized accounting firm that needed experienced administrative support. The company's owner, approached discreetly by one of William's contacts, was impressed by Sarah's qualifications and willing to offer flexible hours to accommodate her childcare needs. A separate conversation with a local childcare provider resulted in a subsidized placement for Jack, funded through an anonymous donation. Within a month of their visit, Sarah had started her new job. She didn't know the full story of how the opportunity had come about, only that sometimes the right doors opened when you least expected them to. The position offered stability, decent pay, and the possibility of advancement, everything she had hoped for when she had written her letter months earlier. But for William and Catherine, Sarah's success was just the beginning. They had proven that focused, personal intervention could create real change in people's lives. The question now was how to scale this approach while maintaining the personal connection and discretion that had made it effective. As they prepared for their next visit, this time to meet Thomas Fletcher in Newcastle, they realized they were embarking on something unprecedented in modern royal history. They were stepping outside traditional roles to engage directly with the people they served, not as distant figures offering ceremonial support, but as individuals committed to creating tangible change in people's lives. Thomas Fletcher's hands shook slightly as he poured tea into mismatched cups, the morning light filtering through the thin curtains of his cramped Newcastle council house. At 72, he had never imagined his retirement would look like this, sharing his small pension with 7 family members, watching his adult daughter Michelle struggle with unemployment while her 3 children tried to adapt to their new living situation. The visitors who had arranged to meet him that Thursday morning arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, just as his grandchildren were leaving for school. 8-year-old Sophie hugged his leg goodbye, whispering that she hoped the important people would help Daddy find work. Thomas's heart ached at how much the children understood about their family's difficulties, despite their parents' efforts to shield them from worry. William and Catherine, again dressed casually and without fanfare, were struck immediately by the dignity Thomas maintained despite his obvious struggles. His small front room was immaculate, family photographs carefully arranged on every available surface, and he had clearly prepared for their visit with the same attention to detail he might have given to entertaining royalty, though he had no idea that was exactly what he was doing. "I appreciate you taking the time to see me," Thomas said formally, settling into his worn armchair. "Though I'm not quite sure what I can tell you that wasn't already in my letter." Catherine leaned forward with genuine interest. "Tell us about Michelle and the children. How long have they been living here with you?" Thomas's weathered face softened as he spoke about his family. Michelle moved back 8 months ago after losing her flat. She'd been working at the call center for 3 years, good job, steady income. Then, they moved operations overseas, and, just like that, 200 people were out of work. He described how Michelle had initially been optimistic about finding new employment. She had experience, good references, and a strong work ethic. But months of rejections had worn down her confidence, and the financial pressure of supporting 3 children while job hunting had become overwhelming. "She's got an interview next week," Thomas continued. "But it's the same story every time. They want someone younger, someone without childcare responsibilities, someone who can start immediately without worrying about school schedules." William nodded, understanding the complex web of challenges that made re-employment so difficult for single parents. "What about the children? How are they adjusting?" Thomas's expression grew more troubled. "That's what worries me most. Sophie's grades have dropped since they moved here. She shares a bedroom with her little brothers now, no space for homework, constant noise. And teenage Ryan is angry all the time. Angry at the situation, angry at his mother for losing her job, angry at me for not being able to fix everything." The conversation revealed the ripple effects of economic displacement that extended far beyond simple unemployment. Michelle's job loss had destabilized not just her own life, but the lives of her children and her elderly father. The crowded living conditions created stress for everyone. The financial strain affected every family decision, and the emotional toll was evident in changed behaviors and academic struggles. Ryan used to be such a bright lad, Thomas explained. Top of his class, talked about going to university someday. Now he barely speaks to any of us, and his teachers say he's becoming disruptive at school. Catherine felt a particular connection to the challenges facing the children. As a mother herself, she understood how children absorbed family stress, even when adults tried to protect them from it. Have you been able to get any support for the children? Counseling or tutoring to help with the academic issues? We've tried, Thomas replied. But everything costs money, doesn't it? The waiting lists for free services are months long, and private help is beyond our reach. As their conversation continued, William and Catherine began to see how interconnected the family's challenges were. Michelle needed employment, but also needed childcare support and confidence building after months of rejection. The children needed educational support and emotional guidance to help them process the upheaval in their lives. Thomas needed assistance managing the financial and emotional burden of supporting an extended family on his limited pension. If you could change one thing about your situation, William asked, echoing the question he had posed to Sarah Thompson, what would have the biggest impact? Thomas considered this carefully. Proper housing, he said finally. Not just for the space, though that would help enormously, but for dignity. Michelle is a grown woman with children of her own. Living with her father makes her feel like she's failed, and it's affecting how she presents herself to potential employers. This insight struck both William and Catherine as particularly profound. The housing crisis wasn't just about physical space. It was about maintaining dignity and self-respect, which in turn affected everything from job interviews to family relationships. But housing lists are years long, Thomas continued. And the private rental market requires deposits and guarantees we simply can't provide. We're caught between systems that don't work for people in our situation. After spending the morning with Thomas and his family, William and Catherine drove through Newcastle city center, seeing the area through new eyes. Empty shops told stories of businesses that hadn't survived economic changes, while new developments suggested growth that hadn't yet translated into opportunities for families like the Fletchers. Their afternoon was spent in a very different setting, meeting with local employers, housing associations, and education officials, using their connections and influence. But, again without revealing their identities directly, they began to understand the systemic barriers that kept families trapped in cycles of poverty and displacement. One conversation proved particularly enlightening. The manager of a growing logistics company explained that they desperately needed reliable administrative and customer service staff, but struggled to find employees who could commit to the training period without immediate full salary support. We'd love to hire people like Michelle Fletcher, the manager explained, unaware that they had spent the morning with her father. But they need income immediately, and we need 3 weeks of training before they can be fully productive. It's a catch-22 that hurts both us and potential employees. This conversation sparked an idea that would become central to their evolving approach. What if they could create bridge funding that allowed people to participate in training programs without losing income? What if they could help employers invest in local workers by reducing the financial risk of hiring people who needed time to develop specific skills? Similarly, their meeting with a housing association revealed opportunities for creative solutions. There were properties available, but bureaucratic processes and deposit requirements created insurmountable barriers for families like the Fletchers. With the right guarantees and support, these barriers could be removed. That evening, in their hotel room, William and Catherine worked late into the night developing what they would later describe as their intervention framework. Unlike traditional charitable giving, their approach focused on removing specific barriers that prevented people from helping themselves. For the Fletcher family, this meant coordinating several simultaneous interventions. Through careful arrangement with local partners, Michelle was offered a position with the logistics company, with her training period salary guaranteed through an anonymous fund. A housing association property became available with modified requirements that the family could meet, and educational support was arranged for all 3 children, including specialized counseling for Ryan to help him process the family's upheaval. Perhaps most importantly, these interventions were structured to be sustainable. Michelle's job had advancement potential, the housing was affordable long-term, and the children's support included programs designed to build resilience and academic success over time. Within 6 weeks of William and Catherine's visit, the Fletcher family had moved into their own 3-bedroom house. Michelle had started her new job, and the children were showing significant improvement both academically and emotionally. The transformation was remarkable, but what struck William and Catherine most was how little direct financial assistance had been required. It wasn't about giving them money, Catherine observed during one of their strategy sessions. It was about removing barriers and creating connections that allowed them to build their own solutions. This realization shaped their thinking as they planned interventions for other families. Each situation required different approaches, but the underlying principle remained constant. Identify the specific barriers preventing people from improving their circumstances, then work systematically to remove those barriers while preserving dignity and promoting self-sufficiency. By autumn, William and Catherine had quietly assisted more than a dozen families across the United Kingdom. Each intervention was carefully planned and executed with absolute discretion, creating change that appeared to come through natural opportunities rather than charitable assistance. The families themselves often had no idea of the coordinated effort behind their improved circumstances. They knew their situations had changed, but attributed it to good fortune, timing, or their own persistence finally paying off. This anonymity was crucial to maintaining dignity and ensuring that the assistance truly empowered rather than created dependency. However, the cumulative effect of these interventions was beginning to attract attention in unexpected ways. Social workers, community leaders, and local officials began noticing patterns of positive change that seemed too coordinated to be coincidental. Questions were being asked about who was behind these remarkable transformations. The first hint that their secret mission might become public came on a rainy Tuesday in October, when investigative journalist Emma Walsh received an unusual tip from a source in Newcastle. Walsh, known for her meticulous research into social issues, had been tracking patterns of unusual assistance reaching struggling families across northern England. What started as curiosity about coordinated charitable work had evolved into something much more significant. "There's something happening that doesn't add up," her source had explained over coffee in a quiet Newcastle cafe. Families with impossible situations suddenly finding perfect solutions. Jobs appearing exactly when needed, housing becoming available, support services materializing. It's too coordinated to be coincidence, too sophisticated to be standard charity work. Walsh spent weeks investigating, following paper trails that led nowhere and interviewing families whose lives had transformed seemingly overnight. The stories were consistently remarkable. Single mothers finding stable employment with flexible schedules, elderly people receiving home care that allowed them to remain independent, families moving from overcrowded conditions into suitable housing. What intrigued Walsh most was the pattern of discretion surrounding these interventions. Unlike typical charitable assistance, there were no public announcements, no photo opportunities, no requests for gratitude or publicity. The help appeared to come through natural channels. Employers recognizing talent, housing associations finding creative solutions, community organizations discovering previously unknown resources. Her breakthrough came when she noticed the same intermediary appearing in multiple cases, a discreet consulting firm that seemed to specialize in connecting people with opportunities. When she researched the firm's ownership structure, she found layers of trusts and holding companies that eventually led to connections with several royal patronages. Meanwhile, William and Catherine continued their private visits, unaware that their activities were being scrutinized. Their most recent intervention involved the Patel family in Birmingham, where elderly Mr. Patel was struggling to care for his wife, who had developed dementia, while simultaneously helping his unemployed son navigate a difficult job market. The complexity of the Patel family's situation required their most sophisticated intervention yet. Mrs. Patel needed specialized care that would allow her to remain at home with her husband. Their son Raj needed employment that could accommodate his caregiving responsibilities, and the family needed emotional support to cope with the challenges of dementia. Working with local health services, employment agencies, and community organizations, William and Catherine's team created a comprehensive support package. Mrs. Patel was enrolled in a day care program that provided social interaction and specialized activities while giving her husband respite. Raj was connected with a flexible employment opportunity in IT support that allowed him to work partially from home. The family was also connected with a support group for families dealing with dementia. During their visit to the Patel family, William and Catherine were struck by the dignity with which Mr. Patel approached his caregiving responsibilities. Despite the stress and isolation, he spoke lovingly about his wife of 50 years and his determination to honor the vows they had made to care for each other. She was a teacher for 30 years, he told them, showing photographs of his wife in younger days. Hundreds of children learned from her, and she never forgot a single student's name. Now she sometimes forgets mine, but I see glimpses of the woman I married in her smile. These personal stories continue to drive William and Catherine's commitment to their mission. Each family they met reinforced their understanding that behind every statistic about poverty, unemployment, or social challenges were real people with dreams, dignity, and determination who simply needed the right support at the right time. However, as autumn progressed, maintaining secrecy became increasingly challenging. The scale of their interventions had grown beyond what their small team could easily coordinate without attracting attention. Local officials began asking questions about the sudden availability of resources and opportunities in their communities. The breaking point came in November when Emma Walsh published her first article about the mysterious assistance reaching struggling families. While she hadn't yet identified William and Catherine directly, her investigation had revealed enough connections to make their involvement apparent to anyone familiar with royal operations. The article described a sophisticated network of assistance that was transforming lives across the United Kingdom through carefully coordinated interventions that preserved dignity while creating sustainable change. Walsh noted that the pattern of assistance suggested resources and connections typically associated with high-level institutional involvement. Within hours of the article's publication, William's private secretary was fielding calls from major news outlets seeking confirmation or denial of royal involvement. The story had captured public imagination in a way that surprised everyone involved. Social media exploded with speculation about the identity of the mysterious benefactors described in Walsh's article. Families who had been assisted began sharing their stories, each adding pieces to a puzzle that painted a picture of unprecedented personal involvement by someone with significant resources and influence. Sarah Thompson, the Manchester mother whose letter had started everything, read Walsh's article with growing recognition. The timeline matched her own experience, and the description of how assistance had been provided resonated with her memories of the understated visitors who had come to her home months earlier. "It was them," she told her friend over the phone. "I know it sounds impossible, but I think Prince William and Catherine came to my house. They sat on my sofa and asked about my children." Similar realizations were occurring across the country as families connected their experiences with the growing media coverage. The story was becoming too big to contain, and William and Catherine faced a decision they had hoped to avoid, whether to confirm their involvement publicly or find ways to continue their work despite media attention. The decision was made for them when Thomas Fletcher, the Newcastle grandfather whose situation had moved them so deeply, chose to speak publicly about his family's experience. In an interview with Walsh, he described the visit from two people who had listened to his story with genuine interest and compassion. "They didn't promise anything," Fletcher told Walsh. "They just asked questions and really listened to the answers. Within weeks, everything started changing for us. Michelle found work, we got proper housing, the children got support. I don't know if it was them or not, but I know that conversation was different from any official meeting I've ever had." Fletcher's interview included details that made royal involvement undeniable to anyone familiar with how such visits would be conducted. The security arrangements, the careful timing, the way questions were asked, everything pointed to individuals with extensive experience in sensitive conversations and access to resources for coordinated assistance. The public response to Fletcher's interview surprised everyone involved. Rather than criticism about royal interference or concerns about appropriate boundaries, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. People expressed admiration for what they saw as genuine service, practical compassion, and effective action. Social media filled with messages of support and gratitude. #QuietService began trending as people shared their own stories of assistance received or witnessed. The phrase, "William and Kate's quiet gesture," appeared in thousands of posts as people celebrated what they saw as authentic leadership and personal commitment to public service. Letters began arriving at royal offices from across the Commonwealth and beyond. Families shared their own struggles and hopes, but more significantly, people offered to help extend the work William and Catherine had begun. Local businesses offered employment opportunities, landlords offered housing at reduced rates, and community organizations volunteered to coordinate support services. The movement had taken on a life beyond anything William and Catherine had envisioned. What had started as personal responses to individual letters had become a model for community action that was spreading organically across the United Kingdom and inspiring similar initiatives internationally. However, with public attention came new challenges. How could they continue the personal, discreet approach that had made their interventions effective while managing the expectations and requests that came with public recognition? How could they maintain the dignity and privacy of the families they had assisted while acknowledging the broader movement their actions had inspired? As December approached, William and Catherine realized their quiet mission had evolved into something unprecedented in modern royal history. They had demonstrated that genuine service could create real change, but now they faced the challenge of sustaining that impact while navigating the complexities of public attention and institutional expectations. The morning of December 15th dawned crisp and clear across London as William and Catherine prepared for what would become one of the most significant moments in modern royal history. After weeks of careful consideration and consultation with senior royal advisors, they had decided to address the nation directly about their private mission that had captured global attention. The decision to speak publicly hadn't been made lightly. The success of their quiet interventions had depended entirely on discretion and personal connection, qualities that seemed incompatible with the scrutiny that now surrounded their actions. However, the movement their work had inspired had grown beyond anything they could have imagined, and with that growth came both opportunities and responsibilities they couldn't ignore. In the weeks following Emma Walsh's revelations and Thomas Fletcher's interview, the response had been extraordinary. The hashtag Quiet Service movement had spread internationally, with people sharing stories of assistance given and received. More importantly, communities had begun organizing their own networks of support, inspired by the model William and Catherine had demonstrated. Local quiet service groups had formed in dozens of cities, connecting people who needed help with others who had resources to offer. Employers were reaching out to offer training programs for unemployed workers, landlords were providing affordable housing options, and neighbors were supporting each other in ways that addressed both practical needs and emotional isolation. The scale of community response had convinced William and Catherine that their actions had triggered something much larger than individual charity. They had demonstrated the possibility of systematic change achieved through personal connection and coordinated action. However, with that success came pressure to formalize their approach and integrate it with existing charitable and governmental systems. Standing in the same study where William had first read Sarah Thompson's letter months earlier, Catherine reviewed the speech they would deliver that evening. The address would be broadcast from Windsor Castle, but, unlike traditional royal speeches, this one would acknowledge the personal nature of their recent work and commit to continuing their direct service in new ways. "Are you ready for this to change everything?" Catherine asked as they prepared to leave for the castle. "It already has changed everything," William replied. "Now we just have to make sure the change leads somewhere positive." The speech that evening was unlike any delivered by members of the royal family in living memory. Rather than speaking from a formal podium, William and Catherine sat together in a comfortable setting, addressing the camera as if they were having a conversation with each viewer personally. "A few months ago, we received letters from families across the United Kingdom," William began. "These letters shared stories of struggle, hope, and determination that moved us deeply and challenged us to think differently about service and responsibility." Catherine continued, "We realized that traditional approaches to charitable work, while valuable, weren't addressing the specific barriers that prevented good people from improving their circumstances. So we decided to try something different." They described their decision to meet privately with families, to understand their situations personally, and to work behind the scenes to create opportunities and remove barriers. They acknowledged the controversy that might surround such direct intervention, but emphasized their belief that genuine service required personal connection and practical action. "We didn't set out to start a movement," Catherine explained. "We simply responded to letters from people who needed to know they weren't forgotten. But what we discovered was that small, thoughtful actions could create significant change when they addressed real needs with dignity and respect." William addressed the broader implications of their work. "The response from communities across the country has shown us that this approach to service, quiet, personal, effective, resonates with people's understanding of how we should care for each other. The question now is how we build on that foundation. They announced the creation of the Community Connection Initiative, a new approach to royal service that would formalize their methods while maintaining the personal touch that had made their interventions effective. Rather than traditional charitable patronages, they would work directly with local communities to identify needs and coordinate resources. The initiative would include several innovative elements. Local coordinators would be established in communities across the United Kingdom, trained to identify families who could benefit from targeted assistance and to coordinate with local employers, housing authorities, and service providers. A discretionary fund would provide bridge funding for training programs, deposits, and other barriers that prevented people from accessing opportunities. Most importantly, the entire system would operate with the same discretion and dignity that had characterized their original interventions. This isn't about charity in the traditional sense, Catherine explained. It's about creating pathways for people to achieve their own goals. We're not giving handouts. We're removing barriers and creating connections that allow people to build their own solutions. The response to their announcement was immediate and overwhelming. Social media erupted with messages of support and offers of assistance. Within hours, hundreds of local businesses had contacted royal offices offering employment opportunities, training programs, and resources for the new initiative. More significantly, the families they had originally assisted chose to speak publicly about their experiences. Sarah Thompson appeared on morning television, describing how the quiet intervention she had received had transformed not just her circumstances, but her children's futures. Michelle Fletcher wrote an editorial for a Newcastle newspaper, explaining how dignified assistance had allowed her family to rebuild their lives without losing their self-respect. "They didn't save us," Fletcher wrote. "They helped us save ourselves." That's the difference between charity that makes donors feel good and service that actually changes lives. International response was equally remarkable. Commonwealth countries announced similar programs inspired by the British model. The European Union established a working group to study community-based intervention strategies. Academic institutions began developing curricula around dignified assistance and barrier removal approaches to social services. However, the most meaningful response came from the families whose lives had been changed by William and Catherine's quiet gestures. 6 months after the public announcement, they organized their own gathering, not a formal event, but a simple afternoon in a London park where their children could play while the adults shared their experiences. Sarah Thompson's children, Emma and Jack, had flourished in their stable environment. Emma was excelling in her advanced mathematics program, while Jack had started school with confidence and enthusiasm. Sarah herself had been promoted to a supervisory position at work and was considering pursuing further education. The Fletcher family had settled into their new life with remarkable resilience. Michelle had not only succeeded in her job, but had been selected for management training. Ryan, the angry teenager, had discovered a passion for community service and was volunteering with other families facing similar challenges. Sophie and her younger brothers were thriving academically and socially. Thomas Fletcher, now living comfortably in sheltered accommodation that allowed him independence while providing support, had become an informal advocate for elderly people facing similar challenges. His experience with the royal intervention had inspired him to help coordinate assistance for other seniors in his community. The Patel family had found stability and support that allowed them to navigate the challenges of dementia with dignity and hope. Mrs. Patel's condition remained challenging, but the support systems in place had allowed her husband to maintain his caregiving role while preserving his own health and well-being. Raj had advanced in his IT career and had become a resource for other families dealing with similar caregiving responsibilities. As the families gathered that afternoon, their children playing together on the swings and slides, the adults reflected on how their lives had changed. But, more than that, they discussed how they could extend the help they had received to others facing similar challenges. "It's not enough that our situation's improved," Sarah Thompson observed. "We have to make sure this becomes something bigger than just helping a few families." And it had become something bigger. By the first anniversary of William and Catherine's announcement, the Community Connection Initiative was operating in over 200 communities across the United Kingdom. Thousands of families had been assisted, but, more importantly, the model of dignified, targeted intervention had been adopted by local governments, businesses, and community organizations. The ripple effects extended far beyond the families directly assisted. Employers who had participated in the program reported higher retention rates and stronger community connections. Housing associations had developed more flexible policies that accommodated diverse family situations. Schools had created support programs that addressed both academic and emotional needs of children facing family difficulties. Perhaps most significantly, the initiative had changed public understanding of what effective service could look like. Rather than distant charitable giving or bureaucratic social services, people had seen the power of personal connection combined with practical action. Communities had learned that they possessed the resources to solve many of their own problems when those resources were properly coordinated and thoughtfully applied. As William and Catherine reflected on the years since their first visit to Sarah Thompson's home, they realized that their quiet gesture had indeed sent ripples of emotion across the globe. And, at its heart remained the simple principle that had motivated William and Catherine from the beginning. Everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and given the opportunity to build their own path to a better future.